And even though the bullets were ripping into me, it was immediate overwhelm because it took seemingly 30 seconds for these two bullets to hit me because time slowed down when they're actually happening in that space of time. So I was in absolute panic mode. But then it was thinking back to, I knew that if I got shot, I needed to fire back as soon as I possibly could. And I went through all this process in that space of time because I was able to bring the emotions back down and the rational thinking back up because of the mindset that I had and taking responsibility on those 4 levels. I already had some idea of the challenges I was going to face, and I had some idea of them, the way I was going to respond to them.
Yeah, and that's just incredible. Man, you've got so much wisdom to share and so many helpful tools for us to add to our toolkit. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Infinite Ability Podcast. I am your host, Nick Yerhart, and we are here to encourage each other to find our own unique abilities. Let's go. This episode of the Infinite Abilities Podcast is brought to you by the one and only Infinite Toolbox, where just like all other toolboxes, we will get the job done, guaranteed. Whether you're an entrepreneur looking to save time, boost revenue, or automate your processes, Infinite Toolbox has got you covered. With powerful tools designed to drive leads, expand your reach, and gain your industry secrets, we help you work smarter, not harder. Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Visit us at infinitetoolbox.com. That's infinitetoolbox.com, and discover how infinite your potential really is. All right, everyone. So today I have Derrick, and this man is truly incredible. He served in law enforcement, and on the show we like to talk about overcoming challenges. And Derrick definitely overcame some challenges. He actually got shot 14 times. And his story is remarkable about how he came up the other side of that better. So I can't wait for him to share his story and help you out. So, Derrick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that intro, Nick. Great talking to you. I was a policeman for 42 years in South Australia. And in 1989, I became a member of what we call Star Force. And Star Force is Special Task and Rescue. It's high risk, it's hostage siege, it's counter-terrorism. We were close quarter security to the Queen when the Queen came to visit. It's cliff rescue, it's cave rescue, it's mine rescue, it's helicopter operations. I was also a diver for underwater recovery. So you would equate us, and we're not at the same level of professionalism, but we are the equivalent of the military SEALs or the Delta Force or the Marines. And I was trained by our military elite at that level, our military SAS in counter-terrorism. So it was a very exciting place to work, very, very demanding, physically, mentally, emotionally demanding. And I absolutely loved it. But in 1994, we went out to arrest a guy who obviously wasn't real keen on being arrested. And he made it clear when he started shooting. We approached his house. We were wearing full police uniform. We were wearing what we call police flak vests. Most people call them bulletproof vests, but I can tell you right now, they ain't bulletproof. We went to the house. We knocked, we called. There was no answer. We knocked again, we called again, because we had a sniper sitting in the bush for about the last 20 minutes prior to our arrival. And he'd been watching the house. He knew the offender was inside. We knew he should be answering the door. He still didn't answer the door on the second knock. At this stage, I've gone down the side of the house towards a glass sliding door. And as I got within about 2 feet of that sliding door, the offender started shooting, and I was a target. He was using a Chinese military weapon. Your audience will probably appreciate it more than the average Australian. It was a 7.62 or 308 caliber SKS Chinese military weapon. Same weapon that Chinese use when they go to war. He fired 18 times and he hit me 14 times. Now, I'll tell you some more detail about that in a minute. As to what it actually felt like to be hit and what it felt like to be responding at the time that I was being shot. But after being shot, I was lying on the ground for 3 hours, fully conscious, monitoring my mindset, which was probably the most important thing I possibly could. Monitoring my mindset so that I could monitor and manage my physiology. And so there were 4 things that I knew I needed to do, and this is as applicable to me and special forces as it is to anybody else. Whenever we get into that place where we're managing challenge, we need to control panic. Don't let panic control the situation. We need to control shock, which is our body's physiological response to either physical or psychological trauma. We need to slow down our heart rate and we need to slow down our breathing. For me, that meant that I could slow down my rate of bleeding and I could focus on what I wanted to focus on. And I was doing that for 3 hours before people could get to me. During that time, I also had 2 severed arteries. Severed artery in my left forearm and a severed artery in my right wrist. 2 bullets in my stomach, 2 bullets in my left thigh. 1 bullet went through my right Achilles tendon, took out 80% of my Achilles tendon. And as I like to say, the other bits and pieces were also there as well. But I was hit 14 times.
Wow. That's just, as you know, you shouldn't be here, but you are. And you are because you had, you weren't done with life yet. And that's very clear. And especially with what you're doing now, I definitely know that, you are helping people. And that's really incredible.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I do like to say that I wasn't done with life. But it wasn't about me. It was my focus, my entire focus for the entire time that I was lying on the ground was about getting back to my children and just being able to interact with them. Thinking about my kids gave me the focus, the determination to fight, to live. All I wanted to do, and my children at the time were a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old. And all I wanted to do was get back and interact with them. As we'll get into, I had conversations with my wife 5 years prior to the shooting and then thought about the same conversation while I was on the ground. That were the massive injuries that I had. I may spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. As you can appreciate, it's not going to be the same as Star Group. But I was going to find a way to make that as good as possible because I wanted to be able to enjoy my life with my children. And that was the one thing I focused on. It wasn't getting back to the job. It wasn't getting back to driving a beautiful car. It wasn't getting a promotion. Nothing else at all. I just wanted to get back and be able to interact with my children. Bottom line for me, and this is a conversation I had with my wife 5 years prior to the shooting, bottom line for me, anything better than death is going to be a bonus. Death was a reality. There's no 2 ways about it. It was always going to be possible. But for me, in the conversation I had 5 years before the shooting, when I first joined Star Group, was I had that conversation with my wife, and I said, I need you to know right now, if I get shot and I don't die, anything better than death is a bonus. And if I have to spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, then I will find a way to make it interesting.
Yep. And I love something that you talked about when you were lying there for 3 hours. You had to focus on your mindset. And mindset is something that I talk about a lot. Your mindset can change your entire life. And, it's what you think about, you attract and you create. So, I never really thought about, your mindset in a situation like that. And, that's not something I ever thought about, but it's like, yeah, your mindset at that moment probably saved your life because you were focused on your children and your family. And that's huge. And the human body can overcome a lot of things as long as your brain is thinking the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. If your mind's thinking the right way, you can overcome massive, massive stuff. But we've got to have the right mindset, but then we've got to put action behind it, right? We can't just sit there and go, oh, this is going to be wonderful. If I think wonderful things, it's all going to happen. We've got to be prepared to think, this is going to be wonderful for this reason. These are the things that I can do to make it happen. And then don't expect perfection, because there are a lot of things that, besides the shooting, I need mindset to achieve lots of other things. And I've got the great mindset, but I'm not always successful. And I have to keep on analyzing, reflecting, learning, tweaking what I'm doing, and coming back and having another crack and another crack. It doesn't create success just because you're thinking, well, you've got to have the good mindset, you've got to have the good actions, and you've got to be prepared to have perseverance as well.
Yep, exactly. I agree. You can't just think the life that you want into reality. You have to think it and then take action, make it happen.
Absolutely.
Yep. So now, I know that, when you were in your recovery stages, if I remember from our last conversation, you loved to run, and I believe they said that you would never run again.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the shooting, the 2 bullets hit my left thigh. I lost for probably about 30% of the muscle in there, of the quadricep, as well as a couple of other minor muscles in there. I lost about 30% of the muscle overall. My right Achilles tendon, 80% of the thickness of my Achilles tendon is gone and is still gone. So I've only got 20% of the Achilles still holding together. The 2 bullets in my stomach, I lost 45 centimeters of bowel all up. And doctors said with that combination of injuries, I may spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. I may be able to walk, but I'll always have a walking stick. Because of the damage to the Achilles, I won't be able to control my foot properly, and my foot will keep on dropping, and I'll trip over my own foot unless I really, really focus on it all the time. And I accepted what the doctor said. I accepted that that's their reality, and that was their prediction. And if that's true, then that's fine, because anything better than death is a bonus. But I wasn't going to sit back and go, your prediction is my outcome. And I wanted more. All I wanted to do, again, was run, hop, skip, jump with my children. And so once, while I was in hospital, it was about 10 days after the shooting, and I was lying on the bed, and I hadn't got out of hospital. I hadn't got out of bed yet. Bandaged up, everything bandaged. Everything was painful to move. And the doctor came in, and I said to the doctor, when will I be able to start walking again? And he said, Derrick, with the injuries you've got, and particularly the Achilles tendon, it's going to be at least another 2 weeks. You have to be able to get your foot into just the right position so that it's not going to snap the Achilles. And I was working with physios and nurses, and I said, hey, listen, I can already get my foot into that position. And he's gone, pardon? And he said, well, okay, if you can already get it into that position, then okay, let's start taking those steps today. And so I started walking just 10 days after the shooting. And let me tell you, the first step, absolutely excruciating. It was, I put weight on my foot, and it was excruciating, and I fell back into bed. The next day I got up and I took 1 step, fell back into bed. The next day I took 2 steps, and then later that day I took 3 steps, and it just kept on going. And eventually I was walking up and down the hallway with not a walking frame down here, but it was a walking frame to completely support me. It was one of those really tall ones.
Yeah.
But I was determined to get as fit and strong as I possibly could, as quickly as I could, without pushing myself too much, to really find balance. But I had to make sure that I had those things in place. I walked out of the hospital 28 days after the shooting without any assistance. There was definitely a limp. I definitely wasn't able to walk very far, but I definitely walked out of there. I was determined to get as fit as I could. And I walked out of the hospital without any assistance, without a stick, knowing that I might regress. And I did regress. And I went back to walking with a stick for quite some time, just to make sure that I didn't fall and didn't hurt myself. I didn't feel it was that I needed the stick. I could have walked without it, but I was better off to walk with the stick and not do myself any extra damage. So I took that humble step of going, give me a stick. And it was a 4-pronged stick, not just a one stick. But I just wanted to walk, run, hop, skip, jump with my kids. And the more I tried, the better I got. And once I started being able to do a little bit more, I lifted my goals. It wasn't just run, hop, skip, jump with the kids. It was run, hop, skip, jump with other people as well. And then it was run, hop, skip, jump with a cohort. But eventually I started lifting my sights, and I looked getting back to policing and back into Star Group. And 2.5 years after the shooting, I went back to Star Force on full duties with no restrictions. I've been back to run, hop, skip, jump with the elite, jumping in and out of helicopters, sprinting, wearing heavy vests, going back to high-risk arrests and all those sorts of things. Absolutely fully operational. There is no doubt 20% of my Achilles tendon is still weak. There is a weakness when I run. 30% of the muscle in my left thigh is still missing. I love to ride bikes, and it's been 30 years since the shooting, so I've probably done 20,000 kilometres or 15,000 miles on the push bike since then. So that muscle was built back up, but there's still this huge divot in my thigh, but it hasn't stopped me running. It stopped me running. Well, I'm not running as much these days because I'm an old man, and old men don't run as much as young guys. But I went back into Star Group and I did everything fully operational, no restrictions, and it was against all the predictions of everything the doctors were saying.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible, and that's a testament to your drive and fight, So that's just, it really shows, who you are, and you're not gonna let anything stop you. And I share that with you. I push through every day. The doctor said that I would never walk. I started walking at age 5. I've been walking ever since. So I really respect people that really push through, no matter what, and no matter what anybody says. I think that's really awesome.
And I've had a look at a little bit of your history. I obviously haven't looked at it all, but I've looked at a little bit of your history, and hats off to you, buddy. What you have done, what you have pushed through, your determination. Humbly, I say it's probably more determined than mine. You've been doing it for a lifetime. I did it for a period of time, but you've been doing it for a lifetime, and you're doing some amazing stuff.
Well, we've actually been doing it about the same time. I'm almost 34, so almost the same amount of time.
Okay.
Yep, so okay. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Excuse me. Thank you. Excuse you.
So, what are you working on these days?
These days, I tell that story at the beginning or the close of conferences. So I'm a keynote speaker, and I talk about what I call human durability. And I tell that story, but then I talk about the mindset and what it takes to control that mindset. And a lot of people would think, oh, wow, that story is amazing, to open or close a conference because it's very inspiring. But it also includes a hell of a lot of humor as well. And that humor is really, really important. And it's really amazing that, and I still find it a little bit surreal, that I'm able to talk about the fact that I was shot 14 times. And I tell people about the bullets ripping into my body. And even at the time the bullets were ripping into my body, I was able to start having light-hearted conversations with myself. And I have people cracking up laughing at that conversation that I had with myself, even though I was still responding absolutely appropriately to everything that I needed to do. But what I talk about these days, part of it is resilience, and resilience is our ability to bounce back. And that's a very important skill to have. But what I talk about is what I call human durability. And that's our ability to sustain optimal performance. And optimal performance is the very best we can possibly do in a given situation. And that meant that my mindset had to be that when I got shot, Star Force is renowned for our ability to sustain peak performance. Whenever we go out, and you think about Delta Force, you think about the Marines, you think about the Navy SEALs, they are absolute peak performers in everything they do, and we are the same. Everything we do, we are required to be absolute best. But once I got shot, if I tried to sustain the absolute best, absolute peak, my heart would have been pumping, my breathing would have been absolutely pushed to the max. And so my mindset had to be, if I get shot and I get injured, then I have to work out what is the very best I can do in that circumstance to sustain my life. Pushing myself to the nth degree, I would have died. No two ways about it. So it was about slowing down the heart rate, slowing down the breathing, controlling the mindset, not going into panic, and controlling my shock and controlling my physiology. And that's not something that we are taught. That's something that I'd learned in other spheres of my life. So as a diver, I was taught to control my body, because if we get down deep as a diver and then we get stuck or caught or something goes wrong, we've only got a finite amount of oxygen or air on our back. And so we need to be able to control our mind, control our breathing, slow down our whole system so that we don't use don't use the air too much. And so when I got into this situation, I've gone, do you know something? I need to embrace what I learned there and control my body so that I don't use my blood as quickly as I would if I was in a peak performance mode. Because I would have bled out within, well, the rationale says I had a severed artery in my left forearm. It was the radial artery. I had a severed ulnar artery in my right wrist, which doctors say I should have bled out within minutes with two severed arteries. But I believe it was that mindset of controlling panic and controlling the shock response of my body that allowed me to not bleed out of those two arteries.
Wow. That's just, it's amazing, your resilience in that situation and how you were just able to control everything. You stayed in control of what you could, and that's just amazing. And then I know you wanted to talk about, what you're going through as you were getting shot, and how it felt and what you're thinking. So if you would, you can share that with us.
Yeah, sensational. So at the time that I was shot, I was walking down the side of the house. And as I got to that, around about 2 feet from that sliding door, that all I wanted to do was check to see whether that was an access point for us, that we can get in faster, easier, safer, more efficiently, more effectively than the entry point that we had chosen from making our initial assessment of the house. And as I got to within about 2 feet of that sliding door, he started to shoot. Had absolutely no idea what was happening to me because I hadn't felt pain. I hadn't felt impact, and I hadn't even heard the sound of gunfire. All I knew was I was suddenly falling to the ground, and I started cursing myself because I hadn't realised I was being shot. All I knew was I was falling to the ground, and I was hard on myself. I was swearing, I was cursing inside my head, about why am I being so stupid as to fall at a time like this. And as I was halfway to the ground, I still hadn't felt any pain or impact. But I looked at that glass sliding door again, and there were small round holes that hadn't been there just a moment before. And then I heard the sound of gunfire somewhere in the distance. And as I was falling to the ground, I rationalised to myself, I must be falling because I'm getting shot. But I fall to the ground, fallen onto my back. And at this point, he's still shooting me, right? And this is when 2 bullets hit my left thigh. And at that time slowed down. It seemed to take 30 seconds for these 2 bullets to hit me, have their effect, and then time to move on. And I knew that all I needed to do at that time was just fire back. And I already had my pistol in my hand, but at the time I was lying on my back and I was lining up to shoot, I realised my feet were pointing directly at where I needed to shoot. And I was shooting along the length of my body. And when you're shooting along the length of your body and your feet are at the other end, which way do your feet point when you're lying on the ground? Your feet point up. And I realised that I needed to get up just that little bit so that I could get over the top of my feet. But I had a flak vest on, and I had weaponry, I had equipment on my upper body. And as I've lifted my upper body up, my feet have come up to counterbalance. And the thought that ran through my head was, I better not shoot myself in the foot, because the guys at work will give me shit for the rest of my life. You can just imagine, you get shot 14 times and then you shoot yourself as well. And you shoot yourself in the foot, to put salt on the wound as well. But that's the thought that ran through my mind at the time that I was shooting myself. And people say, how could you possibly have that level of conscious thought at that time of ultimate panic at the same time? And what I put it down to is I took responsibility to 4 different levels. And this is something that a lot of people don't do. When we decide we want to do something, there are a lot of options for us to be able to do it, and we look at all these options. But I say that before we choose any of those options, we need to take responsibility on 4 levels for what's going to happen as a result of taking that option. So we need to take responsibility for our choice. We need to take responsibility for the behaviour that's going to follow our actions. Then we need to take responsibility for the consequences. And this is where most people stop. They say, I'm going to take responsibility for the consequence because I want to make that choice to take that action. And if I do the right thing, I'm going to have the great outcomes. And most people just look at the great outcomes. They look at the potential that there's going to be some struggles. And yes, I can deal with some struggles, but I looked at the extremes, and I talk about having open, honest, confronting conversations with ourselves about the reality. Yes, we want to look at the shiny things, but we also need to look at those really big negative consequences that can also happen as well. And for me, that happened 5 years before the shooting, when I had this conversation with my wife. I said, I'm going into Star Group. And when I joined Star Group, it was actually called Star Force. So you'll hear me switching between Star Force and Star Group. It's the same thing. They changed their name halfway through. But when I first went into Star Force, I said to my wife, I'm going into Star Force. I may be shot and injured. I may be shot and killed. My conversation with her was taking responsibility on those 4 levels as well. Because I said, if I die, what's your life going to look like? Because it's not just about me. It's about her as well. And I wanted her to have that level of conscious thought and conscious acceptance of responsibility as well. And so it's looking at the great stuff. It was going to be wonderful. All these great things are going to happen. It's going to be exciting. And life is going to be great. But there's also the potential of this absolutely massive negative. And so it was an open, honest, confronting conversation. And she found it very, very confronting. And so we've got to look at the absolute extremes. Open, honest, confronting conversations with ourselves. Excuse me just a second.
Yep. You're good. Don't worry.
But the fourth level of responsibility, so it's take responsibility for choice, take responsibility for our actions, take responsibility for our consequences, both positive and negative. But the fourth level is to take responsibility for the future afterwards. And this was having that conversation with her about the fact that I may be shot and injured, I may be shot and killed. What's your life going to look like? But I also said to her, oh, excuse me, but I also said to her, if I get shot and I don't die, I need you to know I may spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. Worst case scenario, I may spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, but I need you to know anything better than death is going to be a bonus to me, so long as I'm able to interact with my children. And this is the level that most people don't start thinking about when they start thinking about, I'm going to make this choice, these are going to be my actions, and the consequences could be absolutely brilliant. There could be some challenges, but they don't start thinking about what is worst case scenario. And it's not always death. There's no two ways about it. But it could be financial failure. It could be my relationship is going to be challenged. It could be my relationship with my children is going to be challenged. It could be I'll lose my job if I take this action. But we don't think to that extent. And then if I do lose my job, what's life going to look like after that? Do I have another source of income? Do I have another job to go to? But we go, I see these shiny things. So we've got to take responsibility on those four levels very, very consciously beforehand. And that sets our minds up to being able to be positive within the midst of it. Because I've got a model for what I call human durability. And if we follow that model through, then it gives us two levels of comfort by following that model through. Because if we think about worst case scenario, people get overwhelmed. They go, oh, I don't want to think about it. It's too scary. And if anybody has been in business and they've been on a committee and the committee is to find solutions for something, the committee is always aware of this elephant in the corner of the room. And quite often we don't talk about the elephant. We talk about the obvious things, but people know about the elephant. People go, well, what if that happens? But nobody wants to talk about it. And being shot was that elephant in the corner of the room for me. And people don't want to talk about it. But we need to talk about that. Because if we talk about that elephant in the corner of the room and we address it and we say, oh my gosh, that elephant is scary. That is really overwhelming. And if I don't talk about it, I'm going to go forward tentatively, cautiously, and always hoping this elephant doesn't actually happen. But if we go through this model of human durability, then we're able to address that elephant in the corner of the room. And the two levels of comfort that come out of it is, okay, I've thought about that elephant, but I've also considered if that elephant comes to fruition, if that the worst case scenario actually happens, do I have the finance? Do I have the resources? Do I have the expertise? Do I have the support on my team? Do I have the support of my family? All those sorts of things. And can I handle that? And when we realize that actually we have the support, we have the finances, we have the resources, wow, actually, even if the worst case scenario happens, I'll be able to handle it. We're now not going forward cautiously, tentatively. We're able to go forward boldly, courageously, and make decisions and take action that other people go, oh my God, that's crazy. How can you do that? It's because I've considered worst case scenario and I know I can deal with it. So that first level of comfort is I can handle worst case scenario. Let's go forward courageously. The second level of comfort is that, okay, worst case scenario, if that does happen, I don't have the finance or I don't have the resource, or my partner probably won't support me. My boss probably won't be pleased. So worst case scenario, I probably won't be able to handle that situation. And the second level of comfort is I can now step back and say, no, I'm not going to take that action. But instead of just stepping back and saying, no, I'm not going to take it because it doesn't seem right, I'm not sure about it, it just doesn't feel as if I'll be able to handle it. Because we've gone through this conscious process and we've identified all the bits and pieces we have and the gaps in our resources or our finance or our support, we're able to articulate the reasons for that saying no. And when we can articulate the reason for saying no, that gives the people around us, our team, our family, the confidence, oh, wow, this person is a really good leader. Not only have they thought about it, but they've thought through the reason and they're able to share that reason with us. And that reasoning gives your team more belief in you and being a leader. But it also gives you the comfort of saying, no, I'm not going to do this for these reasons. The other good side of being able to say, I'm not going to do it for these reasons, is it gives other people the ability to discuss with you. Okay, you say you can't do it for this reason. Have you thought about the fact that we've got this resource over here, which would actually solve that? Or we've got this over here, and we can actually use that instead of that missing part. And so you can have discussions about it, rather than just saying, nah, it just doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel right. And so actually taking responsibility on those 4 levels, going through the model and discussing worst case scenario gives us the confidence to either go forward boldly, courageously, or step back and say, no, we're not going to do it for these reasons. And so that's what I'm doing these days. I speak at conferences and seminars and open the conferences or close conferences, or I will run either a 90-minute workshop all the way through to a 2-day workshop. And I've done this for kids in schools. I've done this for fighter pilots in our Air Force, the absolute top-gun fighter pilots. I've done it for CEOs. I've done it for hairdressers. I've done it for electricians. I've done it for banking, for finance, for real estate. It is a universal model that applies to anything. And it comes down to very practical, pragmatic ways of having discussions and implementing tools to give us the mindset to have that belief that we are either able to manage those challenges or step back and say, no, we're not going to do it unless we've got this and put it in place.
Yep. And I love that you have the 4 levels of responsibility, because my mentor, Grant Cardone, he always says, take full responsibility for everything. And I like your model, because that's something that I can now follow in my life. I'm gonna take that and use that for everything, because I know that that's gonna be extremely helpful. So I just gotta thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Thank you. I guess the other thing I might add to that is that people don't start having conversations about taking responsibility for the consequences until something negative happens.
Yeah.
And if you think about the conversations that people have in business, if somebody's boss walks into their office or out into the space and they go, I need to have a conversation with you, people start instantly going, oh my God, what have I done wrong? What's gone bad? What's the boss going to be talking about? How much trouble am I in? And you'll get into the boss's office and they'll say, hey, listen, this has happened. This has gone wrong. We need to take responsibility for it. And we certainly do. Those conversations are about, this has gone wrong. These are the choices we made. These are the actions we took that we need to not repeat. We don't need to do that again. Okay. And they're very important conversations. But I believe a more important conversation is for the boss to call you into the office and go, you had some great results. What you did was absolutely amazing. Let's start taking responsibility for the consequences, the choices, the actions that you took to get the great outcomes. Because when we can look at those choices and what those actions were, we can repeat those, but we don't actually sit down and have conversations about the good consequences. We just go, oh, that worked out well. I hope we can do that again. Now that's dumbing everything down. That's simplifying everything. And yes, we talk about things to higher levels than that, but we don't actually sit down and consciously, very often, go through those positive consequences. Let's have a look at it. What choices did you make? What actions did you take? What challenges did you overcome to get to that point where you could create that great outcome? And now, how can we repeat that?
Yeah, I love that, and I'm I guilty of that myself with the people in my life, Like you said, we usually wait until something goes wrong before we have a conversation. But we should really have more conversations about what people are doing right. And, but by doing that, that's just going to lift everybody up and really help everyone. So I love that, and that's something that I'm going to take to heart and use in my life starting now.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And it's also then, and this is very much about what's happened with where I am now, why I'm talking about what I call human durability.
Mm-hmm.
I've had those conversations with people, and people say, what were you thinking at the time of the shooting? How did you get through that? How were you able to think through the fact that you wanted to shoot back, but you didn't want to shoot yourself in the foot, and you didn't want the guys to be giving you bad nicknames as a result of shooting yourself in the foot? And then for the 3 hours I was lying on the ground, how was I able to think consciously about control panic, control shock, don't let my heart rate get too high, slow down my breathing? How was I able to consciously think that through? And it's when I started having those conversations with people, I started looking at my methodology. And from what I understand, is that was something that came to me innately, intuitively. It's not something that people had actually taught me. Yes, my training in Star Force was at the highest levels, and we contingency planned for operational, logistical things that could go wrong on a job, on a high-risk incident, on a rescue, on something that went wrong in a close-quarter protection to VIPs. All those logistical things, but we didn't think about what could possibly go wrong inside our mind when our emotions get involved. 30 years ago, we were taught that with the training that we're getting in Star Force, we are going to build you to be unbreakable. You will not be affected by emotions. You'll be able to get through things. You won't even think about it. You'll stay completely focused. It was all very positive thinking, but it didn't deal with the reality that we all know that our emotions and our rational thinking sit on an even plane in our mind. And when they're on an even plane, then we can contemplate, we can debate, we can argue, we can get creative, we can problem solve, we can do all that when they're on an even plane. But as soon as things start going out of control, when things aren't going the way we want them to do, in the military call things going out of control, they have a saying it's a VUCA situation. VUCA, it's a VUCA situation. It is either volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, or it's ambiguous. These are the times that cause us the greatest challenge in our mind. And when those start happening, our emotions start going high and our rational thinking starts going low. And when our emotions go high and our rational thinking goes low, this is when we are in fight and flight mode. This is when we're in panic mode. This is not when we do the smart stuff. This is when we do the dumb stuff. And so what I was taught 30 years ago in Star Force was, no, your emotions won't be involved. You will not get highly emotional. You'll be able to keep your emotions in check, and then your rational thinking will be there. What we know now is that we can't control our emotions. Well, we can't control our immediate emotional response. When something happens to us, our immediate thing is our emotions will go high and our rational thinking will go low. And that's what happened to me in the shooting. That was me falling to the ground and cursing myself. Oh my God, what's going on here? I don't know what's happening. I'm berating myself. Emotions were high. My rational thinking was low. It wasn't, I'm falling. What should I be thinking about now? How should I? No, it was absolute panic mode. My God, why am I doing this? But what I had in place was the 4 levels of responsibility beforehand to put the mindset in place of my emotions have gone high, my rational thinking's low. What do I need to do to bring my mind, my emotions back down so I can get my rational thinking back up? And it was an acceptance that they wouldn't get onto an even plane again, but the closer I can get them, the more rational my thought process would be. And that's when I started thinking and analysing the situation around me. Small round holes, sound of gunfire, I must be falling because I'm getting shot. And even though the bullets were ripping into me, it was immediate overwhelm because it took seemingly 30 seconds for these two bullets to hit me because time slowed down when they're actually happening in that space of time. So I was in absolute panic mode. But then it was thinking back to, I knew that if I got shot, I needed to fire back as soon as I possibly could. And I went through all this process in that space of time because I was able to bring the emotions back down and the rational thinking back up because of the mindset that I had and taking responsibility on those 4 levels. I already had some idea of the challenges I was going to face, and I had some idea of them, the way I was going to respond to them.
Yeah, and that's just incredible. Man, you've got so much wisdom to share and so many helpful tools for us to add to our toolkit. So I just want to thank you. And I want to ask you, my slogan is, your abilities are infinite. Well, what does that mean to you?
I completely agree with you, Nick. Our success is only limited by our imagination. And that doesn't mean that everybody can be an astronaut. That doesn't mean that everybody can be an Olympic athlete. But if our imagination can think of, our reality is built into distinct steps. First of all, our reality is built in our mind, and then our reality is built by the actions we take as a result of it. And our possibilities are infinite. There is no two ways about it. There are what I call 5 drivers for success. And that first driver is retaining a sense of optimism. And optimism is not about saying that I can create absolute perfection. Optimism is about saying that I can create something that is better than where I am now. While I was lying on the ground, having been shot and facing that reality, and for the 3 hours I was lying on the ground, my sense of optimism was not, I'm going to get back to Star Group, I'm going to get back to running and hopping, skipping and jumping, and life is going to be wonderful, life's going to be perfect. My sense of reality is something better than where I am now is I may be able to spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. I just want to be able to interact with my children, and I needed to chase just that something better. I didn't need to be chasing perfection. That was too big a goal, even though it was still in my mind. My first goal was just to get out of this and be able to get back into a wheelchair and be able to interact with my kids. And so we need to retain a sense of optimism about the future. The future can be better than where I am now. The second driver is to believe in our ability to influence it. So in my mind, I'd already worked out the steps that I can take to be able to implement those if I do get shot. These are the steps that I can take to control my mind, to control my body, to control my breathing, control my heart rate, so that I can give myself the best chance of outcome. The third driver is to have meaning. My meaning at the time of being shot was just to get back to my kids and be able to interact with them. Now, as I started being able to walk, as I started being able to jog, as I started being able to run, as I started being able to lift heavier weights, my meaning, I was achieving that meaning of interacting with my kids. And now I was able to lift my eyes and look at different goals. And meaning in life for me was to get back to Star Group, back to full duties, and get back there without expecting perfection of myself. If I didn't make it, I wasn't going to berate myself. I'd be disappointed, absolutely. But there was always the expectation that the doctors predicted I wouldn't be able to walk properly, let alone run and hop and skip and jump. So if I get back to close to being back to Star Group, that would not be too bad. I've achieved that first goal of being able to run, hop, skip and jump with the kids. So for anybody else, we've got to know what our goals mean to us. It's not about what they mean to other people and what will make us look good to other people. It's about what does it mean to me in my heart for my values? What do I want to achieve? And for me, it was about chasing those goals. The fourth driver is to have a plan. And that plan is simply, as I said before, some idea of what we're going to deal with and some idea of how we're going to deal with it. The plan doesn't have to be completely planned out. It doesn't have to have every case scenario, but we need to do more than just plan A and plan B. We need to have plan C. We need to have plan D. We need to have plan E. We need to have plan F. We don't have to go through everything. We don't have to get overwhelmed by it. But our plans need to address the absolute best outcome, but they also need to address that worst case scenario too, that elephant in the corner of the room. We need to be looking at that. But basic is some idea of what we're going to deal with, some idea of how we're going to deal with it. Because then when the incident happens and our emotions go high and our rational thinking drops, rather to go, oh, actually, I've thought about this before. I've got a plan. As soon as we realize we've got a plan, our emotions start coming down and our rational thinking starts coming up. And we're able to start implementing that plan rather than trying to get creative when our emotions are massively high and our rational thinking's low. It's just not going to work. And the fifth one is the one that most people have challenges with. And this is about engaging support. It's about throwing a hand in the air and saying, hey, listen, this is something that I haven't dealt with before. Or this isn't going well for me. I don't know why. Or this is brand new. You've thrown me a challenge and I don't know what's going on. Or there's something happened in my life, or whatever it might be. There's something happened in my relationship, whatever it might be. It's about saying, I don't know what's going on here. I need some help. Throw a hand in there and say, how can people help me? And being open to that. Obviously, for me, it was throwing my hand in there and saying I need medical help. But it was also about reaching out to my family and getting their support, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Now, that was really challenging in many, many ways because I had to be vulnerable. And I had to say I'm scared. I had to say I'm worried. I had to say that, yes, everybody tells me that there's going to be great things happening for me. Well, what does that process look like? Do I have the skills? How can you help me to get there? But we've got to be prepared to throw a hand in there and say, do you know something? I actually do need some help with this. So those five drivers: retain a sense of optimism, believe in your ability to influence, have meaning in everything you're doing, have a plan, some idea of what you're going to deal with, some idea of how you're going to deal with it, and be prepared to throw your hand in there and ask for support. That's exactly what that means to me. Our life is unlimited, but we can't do it by ourselves.
Yep, I agree. And thank you so much for sharing that. That was extremely helpful to me, and I know the audience as well. And, we started this conversation with your story, and I feel like we could kind of finish it off. I have a couple questions. So, real quick, can you tell us why you had to wait there for 3 hours? And then what ended up happening to the suspect at the end?
Okay, so the 3 hours lying on the ground. I went there with 4 other members of Star Group and 1 guy with a video camera. So, interestingly, if you get on YouTube and you Google Derrick McManus shot 14 times, you will see the video of us approaching the house, knocking on the door. You'll hear the gunfire. And the guys that I was with were actually pinned down by what the shooter was doing. They couldn't get to me. They had to call for backup. Now, if this incident had happened to a member of the public or another police officer, we were the response team. And we would have been there because of the remote location we were in. It would have taken us an hour to get there. So, anybody else, there would have been a response within an hour. But the response team was now bogged down. And we had to call in the backup team. The backup team were doing work an hour the other side of our base. And so the response team had to regroup, re-kit, get back to base, and get the equipment they needed, and then get out to where we were. And they were only on the ground for about 10 minutes before they formulated the plan. And I can tell you right now, they risked their lives. They put their lives on the line. The shooter was still shooting. They believed, and that those words are very important, they believed that he had the opportunity to shoot them as they approached. And so they risked their lives to come in and get me. And so that's why it took 3 hours to get me out.
Okay.
And, just on that risk in their lives. The medical team that treated me when I first got out, the team this way, the medical team came in this way, and where they met, they started treating me straight away. And that was in direct line of fire. They knew they were in danger, but that medical team treated me for 10 minutes in direct line of fire. Absolutely the bravest people on the face of the earth. They knew there was a possibility of them dying. So that's the reason. And the other question you asked was, what was the end result? What happened to the shooter?
Yeah.
He stayed in the house for 41 hours, all up. I was on the ground for 3 hours. He stayed in there for another 38 hours. It's the longest siege that's ever happened in South Australia. And once we got him out, we got him to court. He got 22 years jail, 18 years non-parole. When he appealed for parole, he was knocked back 3 separate times. And the opinion of the parole board really was that he should never see the light of day. He is still a danger to society. His personality has not changed. But he did his 22 years in jail, and he has now been released. And this happened 30 years ago. So now he's been walking amongst us for 8 years.
Wow. This is an incredible story of, perseverance and, your ability to just fight through anything. So I just want to thank you for taking that experience and turning it into a way for you to help others. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure, Nick. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Of course.
Been a pleasure.
This was really good.
Yeah. And I look forward to following you, hearing more about what you're doing, and following the guests that you're going to be interviewing. And I really appreciate the time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this show, please go ahead and share it on your Instagram story and tag me here, the Nick Yerhart. Also, go ahead and share it anywhere else that you see fit, because the only way that I can grow this is by you guys sharing it. I don't sell anything on here. I don't have any sponsors. So let's just get it out there by word of mouth, help more people. Alright, everyone. Remember, your abilities are infinite.